Nobody believed the school janitor. They walked past him every morning without slowing down, without asking what he had seen, what he remembered, or why he never seemed surprised when trouble appeared before anyone else noticed it. But everything changed the day. A CEO unfolded one faded letter that most people would have thrown away. Have you ever watched someone get ignored simply because of the job they did? If a person like that ever changed your life, I would love for you to remember them while you listen to this story. There is someone like that in almost every town, quietly carrying more history than anyone realizes. Harrison Elementary sat at the edge of a quiet Midwestern city where maple trees painted the sidewalks gold every autumn. Parents hurried children through the front entrance each morning with coffee cups in one hand and backpacks in the other. Teachers balanced lesson plans. Delivery trucks came and went. The principal greeted families with practiced warmth. Yet before the first school bus ever arrived, before classroom lights flickered on, before anyone else unlocked a single door, one man had already walked every hallway. His name was Daniel Brooks. Most students simply called him Mr. Brooks. He wore the same navy work jacket almost every day, carried a ring of old keys that jingled softly against his belt, and pushed a cleaning cart that had seen more winters than some of the teachers. Children rarely noticed how many things worked because of him. The drinking fountains never stayed broken for long. Loose desk legs somehow stopped wobbling overnight. Lost lunchboxes always found their owners. Even frightened first graders somehow calmed down after a few quiet words from the janitor with gentle gray eyes. Daniel never asked for attention. He believed that if a place felt safe, somebody had probably done invisible work to make it that way. Every morning he paused beside the school's old oak tree before unlocking the side entrance. It had become a habit after nearly 20 years. He would rest one hand against the rough bark for a brief moment, almost as though greeting an old friend, before beginning another day. Nobody knew why. Nobody ever asked. Inside a small maintenance closet tucked beneath the east staircase stood a dented metal locker containing little more than extra work gloves, a faded lunchbox, spare tools, and one carefully wrapped envelope hidden inside an aging wooden box. Daniel checked that box only once every few months, smoothing the edges of the yellowed paper before placing it back exactly where it belonged. He never spoke about it. Across town, 28 floors above the city streets, another day began very differently. Glass walls reflected the rising sun across the headquarters of Aldridge Education Foundation, one of the country's largest organizations supporting public schools. Its newly appointed chief executive officer, Victoria Aldridge, had earned a reputation for making difficult decisions without hesitation. Investors admired her discipline. Newspapers praised her efficiency. School districts respected the foundation's generous grants. Yet almost no one outside her inner circle knew how relentlessly she demanded evidence before believing anyone's story. Facts came first. Emotions came later. Their worlds could not have felt farther apart. Daniel measured success by whether every child could learn in a clean classroom. Victoria measured success in board meetings, financial reports, and statewide initiatives affecting thousands of students she would never meet. They had never spoken. They had never crossed paths. They did not even know the other existed. Until circumstances quietly began pulling both lives toward the same forgotten piece of paper. That Thursday afternoon the school cafeteria buzzed louder than usual. Rumors drifted between teachers after an expensive piece of technology disappeared from a locked administrative office. Nobody knew exactly when it had gone missing. Some blamed careless staff. Others whispered about outside contractors. Then someone casually mentioned that the janitor had been working in that hallway earlier that morning. The room grew quieter. It was not an accusation at first, just a suggestion spoken softly enough to sound reasonable. Daniel happened to enter carrying fresh boxes of cleaning supplies just as several conversations suddenly stopped. He noticed the silence. He noticed people avoiding his eyes. He noticed two teachers exchanging uncertain glances before quickly looking away. He simply nodded, set the supplies where they belonged, and continued working as though nothing had changed. But for the first time in many years, the familiar hallways no longer felt quite as welcoming. And somewhere inside that forgotten wooden box beneath the east staircase, an old letter waited patiently for the one person who would finally understand why none of them had truly known the man they called Mr. Brooks. Daniel Brooks had long ago stopped expecting people to notice the things he did. in a way that made it easier to keep doing them. His alarm rang every morning at 4:15, though he almost always woke a few minutes before it. Years of routine had turned his body into its own clock. He would sit quietly on the edge of his bed for a moment, listening to the old radiator hum through another chilly morning, offering a silent thank you for one more day to be useful. His apartment was small but orderly. Every item had a place. A worn coffee mug rested beside the sink. A stack of library books waited on the kitchen table. His work boots stood neatly by the front door, freshly cleaned every Sunday evening no matter how tired he felt. There were no expensive decorations, no large television, no signs of luxury. Only framed photographs that spoke of a life measured by people rather than possessions. One picture showed a much younger Daniel standing beside a smiling woman with bright eyes beneath an autumn tree. Another captured a little girl in a graduation gown holding a homemade sign that read, "Thanks, Dad." Visitors were rare, but whenever someone happened to stop by, they often noticed how carefully those photographs had been dusted. Daniel never mentioned them unless someone asked. After making oatmeal and pouring coffee into the same faded thermos he had carried for more than a decade, he fed 2 sparrows that waited faithfully outside his apartment window. It had started one winter when heavy snow covered the ground. Somehow the birds never forgot. Neither did Daniel. He believed small acts of care mattered most when nobody was watching. By 5:30 he was already unlocking Harrison Elementary. He greeted the crossing guard with a wave every morning, even on days she was too busy directing traffic to wave back. He checked every emergency exit. He tested hallway lights. He picked up litter that had blown onto the playground overnight before children could see it. He knew which classroom heater rattled during cold weather, which restroom faucet needed a gentle turn instead of force, and which third-grade student became anxious whenever loud noises echoed through the cafeteria. None of this appeared in his job description. It simply became part of the way he moved through the school. Teachers often discovered little surprises without knowing who had left them. A bookshelf repaired before Monday morning. Fresh tennis balls placed beneath noisy chair legs to protect classroom floors. A loose cabinet hinge quietly tightened before anyone filed a maintenance request. When Mrs. Alvarez returned from medical leave, she found fresh flowers in a recycled glass jar waiting on her desk with no signature attached. She guessed it might have been another teacher. It never occurred to her that the quiet janitor had noticed how empty her classroom looked after weeks away. The children, however, noticed more than adults realized. First graders ran to show Daniel missing teeth before showing their own teachers. Fourth graders trusted him with worries about forgotten science projects. Kindergarten students somehow sensed he would always kneel to meet them at eye level instead of speaking down to them. Daniel had learned years earlier that children listen more carefully when adults slowed down enough to share their height. During lunch breaks he often fixed broken crayons instead of throwing them away. He sharpened colored pencils until every classroom cup looked full again. He kept a small collection of gently used winter gloves inside his maintenance closet because every year at least a few children arrived without warm hands. Nobody asked where the gloves came from. Daniel never explained that he bought them one pair at a time whenever they went on sale after the holidays. His paycheck covered little beyond rent, groceries, gasoline, and modest savings. Yet somehow there was always enough left to replace a child's torn backpack zipper or quietly pay an overdue cafeteria balance through the anonymous donation box outside the office. He never thought of those moments as generosity. To him, they were simply opportunities that happened to arrive before someone else noticed. His closest friend at school was Martha Ellis, the head cafeteria manager. Martha had worked there almost as long as Daniel and possessed the rare ability to understand silence without trying to fill it. Every Thursday she prepared one extra blueberry muffin because she knew Daniel would pretend he was not hungry until she insisted. Their conversations rarely lasted more than 5 minutes, but they covered everything that mattered. The weather, the children, whose parents were struggling, which teacher looked exhausted. Neither one enjoyed gossip. Both preferred paying attention. "You know," Martha said one morning while pouring coffee into his thermos after noticing it was nearly empty. "People think kindness has to be loud these days." Daniel smiled gently. "Most important things are usually quiet." Martha laughed softly. "That sounds like something you should have written on a wall somewhere." Daniel shook his head. "Walls don't need more words. People do. She remembered that sentence long after he walked away. Later that afternoon, Daniel found a tiny stuffed rabbit sitting alone beneath the library reading bench. One ear had nearly come loose, and the white fur had faded from years of being loved. Instead of placing it in the lost and found bin immediately, he carefully stitched the ear back into place using a small sewing kit he kept beside his toolbox. By the next morning, the rabbit looked almost new. When its owner, a second-grade girl named Emma, burst into tears of relief after finding it waiting on her classroom desk, Daniel quietly continued mopping the hallway, as if he had nothing to do with the miracle. Moments like that reminded him why he never regretted choosing a simple life. Yet as dismissal ended that Friday afternoon, he noticed something different. Two unfamiliar black vehicles rolled slowly into the faculty parking lot. Men and women in tailored business clothes stepped out carrying leather portfolios instead of backpacks. The principal hurried outside with an expression far more serious than usual. Daniel paused beside his cleaning cart for only a second before returning to work. He had no reason to believe the visitors had anything to do with him. Still, as their polished shoes echoed across the front hallway, a quiet feeling settled into the building that even the children seemed to sense. Something important had arrived, and Harrison Elementary was about to change in ways no one could yet imagine. Victoria Aldrich had built a career on making decisions other people were afraid to make. At 43, she led the Aldrich Education Foundation with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that every signature carried consequences beyond the paper beneath her hand. The foundation funded scholarships, rebuilt aging schools, financed teacher training, and quietly rescued districts that had nearly exhausted their budgets. Magazine profiles often described her as visionary, disciplined, and relentlessly practical. Those descriptions were not wrong. They were simply incomplete. Every weekday began the same way. Victoria arrived before sunrise, carrying her own briefcase despite having an assistant who offered every morning. She preferred unlocking her office herself. It reminded her that leadership was not something handed to a person. It had to be earned again each day. Before opening a single email, she reviewed one handwritten note from the previous day's school visits. Sometimes it contained a student's dream of becoming a doctor. Sometimes it was a teacher's concern about outdated science equipment. Those notes stayed in a leather notebook she had carried for nearly 15 years. Unlike digital reports, paper forced her to slow down. Her staff admired her work ethic, although many also found her intimidating. She asked difficult questions without raising her voice. She rarely accepted broad statements when evidence could be gathered. If someone claimed a program was successful, she wanted graduation rates, attendance records, and teacher feedback. If someone described an employee as exceptional, she asked for examples rather than adjectives. It was not because she distrusted people. It was because she had learned, often painfully, that good intentions and accurate information were not always the same thing. 10 years earlier, she had approved funding for a celebrated educational initiative after relying too heavily on glowing recommendations. The project collapsed within 18 months, leaving several schools without promised resources. Hundreds of students paid the price for adults who had exaggerated results. Victoria never forgot the letters she received from disappointed parents. Since then, verification had become more than a management style. It had become a personal promise. Yet the same habit that protected her organization also created a quiet limitation. She trusted documented evidence more easily than quiet character. People who spoke confidently often received her attention first. Those who served faithfully without drawing notice rarely entered her field of vision at all. Invisible goodness was difficult to measure on spreadsheets. Harrison Elementary had recently been selected as a finalist for one of the foundation's largest campus revitalization grants. The aging building needed structural repairs, updated classrooms, and improved accessibility. Winning the grant could transform the school for generations. That opportunity explained the arrival of the black vehicles Daniel had noticed the afternoon before. For Principal Linda Harper, the visit represented years of preparation condensed into one important weekend. She knew every classroom would be inspected, every budget reviewed, every maintenance record examined. Teachers stayed late arranging bulletin boards. Volunteers planted fresh flowers near the entrance. Custodians polished hallway floors until they reflected ceiling lights like still water. Nobody wanted to disappoint the Foundation's review team. Victoria insisted on visiting schools personally whenever possible. She believed buildings revealed truths that presentations often concealed. Walking through classrooms told her more than polished speeches inside conference rooms. She noticed chipped paint hidden behind motivational posters. She observed how students greeted office staff. She paid attention to whether teachers smiled naturally, or only when administrators stood nearby. Those details mattered. On Monday morning, she stepped through Harrison Elementary's front doors carrying only a slim notebook and a fountain pen that had belonged to her father. While other executives might have led with introductions, Victoria spent her first several minutes simply observing. Children's artwork covered hallway walls. Lockers showed signs of age but not neglect. The school felt cared for, though modestly funded. "You've maintained the building well," she remarked to Principal Harper while running one hand lightly along a hallway railing. "Thank you," the principal replied with genuine pride. "Everyone here takes ownership." The answer sounded sincere. Still, Victoria quietly wrote 2 words inside her notebook. "Show me." She had learned that every school claimed teamwork. The best ones demonstrated it without realizing anyone was watching. As the tour continued, she noticed something curious. Small repairs appeared everywhere, yet none looked rushed or temporary. Door hinges moved smoothly despite their age. Classroom furniture remained surprisingly sturdy. Emergency exit signs gleamed without dust collecting along the edges. Even the oldest windows opened easily. Someone clearly invested unusual care in ordinary details. "Which contractor handles ongoing maintenance?" Victoria asked. Principal Harper hesitated almost imperceptibly before smiling. "Actually, most day-to-day repairs are handled in-house." Victoria nodded but did not press further. Another note appeared inside her notebook. "In-house." Minutes later they passed Daniel mopping the far end of a hallway. He stepped aside immediately, offering a courteous smile before continuing his work. Victoria acknowledged him with a polite nod, little more. Her attention remained focused on reviewing classroom renovation priorities with the principal. Daniel became another familiar figure in the background, no different from the polished floor beneath her shoes or the freshly painted walls surrounding them. Neither of them realized that this brief moment would matter later. As the tour reached the administrative offices, Assistant Principal Eric Lawson hurried toward Principal Harper carrying a folder whose contents immediately tightened the principal's expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said quietly, though concern colored every word. "The district office needs an update about the missing tablet before noon. They're asking whether we've identified everyone who had access to the hallway yesterday." Victoria instinctively slowed her pace. Missing equipment during a grant review was never ideal. Principal Harper maintained her composure. "We're still gathering information." Eric lowered his voice even further. "Some staff members keep mentioning Mr. Brooks because he was working nearby." The words were spoken carefully, almost reluctantly, yet they lingered in the air longer than either of them intended. Victoria did not respond immediately. She simply looked back toward the empty hallway where the janitor had disappeared only moments earlier. She had no reason to suspect him. She also had no reason to dismiss the possibility. Experience had taught her that assumptions, whether favorable or unfavorable, could be equally dangerous. She opened her notebook once more and wrote a single line beneath the earlier entry. "Verify before believing." Closing the notebook, she calmly turned to Principal Harper. "Before today's visit ends," she said, "I would like to review the maintenance office and speak with every employee who had access to that corridor." It sounded like a routine request. No one objected. Yet with that simple decision, the quiet distance between the Foundation's chief executive and Harrison Elementary's invisible janitor became the first thread in a story that neither of them could stop from unfolding. Monday afternoon settled over Harrison Elementary with the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Lockers clicked shut. Teachers gathered forgotten worksheets. The smell of crayons, floor wax, and cafeteria bread lingered in the hallways. Daniel Brooks pushed his cleaning cart toward the administrative wing, moving with the same unhurried pace that had carried him through nearly 2 decades inside these walls. He had noticed the unusual attention surrounding the missing district-issued tablet, but he refused to let rumors change the way he worked. Floors still needed mopping. Trash bins still needed emptying. Children still deserved a school that felt welcoming when they returned the next morning. He had always believed responsibility did not become less important simply because someone doubted the person carrying it. As he rounded the corner near the front office, he spotted something almost everyone else had missed. A small blue backpack sat alone on one of the hallway benches. The dismissal rush had ended nearly 30 minutes earlier. The building had grown quiet enough that every distant footstep echoed through the corridors. Daniel recognized the backpack immediately. It belonged to Noah Turner, a shy fourth grader whose mother worked 2 jobs and often hurried through pickup before driving straight to an evening shift at the hospital. Daniel gently lifted the backpack onto his cart instead of taking it directly to the lost and found cabinet. He remembered seeing Noah carrying a science journal he had spent weeks completing. If the notebook was inside, leaving the bag unattended overnight might cause unnecessary panic for a child who already worried more than most adults realized. Inside the front office, Secretary Helen Parker looked up from her desk. "Another lost backpack?" she asked with a tired smile. Daniel nodded. "I think I know whose it is. You could just leave it here." "I could." He looked toward the front entrance. "But I think someone might be coming back for it." Helen smiled. "You always think that." "Most of the time I'm right." Instead of locking the bag away, Daniel placed it carefully beside his chair while replacing burned-out light bulbs in the reception area. Nearly 40 minutes passed before the front doors opened again. Noah rushed inside, breathing hard, his mother only a few steps behind him. "I'm sorry," the boy said before anyone asked a question. "I left my backpack." Daniel had already picked it up. "I believe this has been waiting for you." The relief that spread across Noah's face could not have been measured by any report or evaluation. He hugged the backpack against his chest as though it contained something far more valuable than notebooks. "It has my science project," he whispered. "I know." "How?" Daniel smiled. "You've carried that journal everywhere for 2 weeks." Noah looked surprised that anyone had noticed. His mother thanked Daniel several times before hurrying back toward the parking lot. Daniel simply returned to changing light bulbs, never mentioning that he had delayed several other tasks because he believed the backpack would matter deeply to one little boy. Victoria Aldrich happened to witness the exchange while reviewing facilities with Principal Harper from the opposite side of the lobby. She said nothing. It was only a janitor returning forgotten property. Yet she quietly added another observation to her notebook. "Pays attention." The tour continued through classrooms, maintenance rooms, storage closets, and mechanical spaces beneath the school. Victoria asked practical questions about budgets, repair schedules, and long-term maintenance costs. Daniel answered only when spoken to, never volunteering more information than necessary. Every answer was brief, respectful, and precise. "How long has this boiler been operating?" 23 years. "When was the last inspection?" 6 months ago. "Any concerns?" "It will need replacing within 2 winters." No exaggeration. No complaints. Only facts. Victoria appreciated concise answers. Still, something about Daniel puzzled her. Most employees tried to impress visiting executives. Some spoke too much. Others carefully advertised accomplishments that might strengthen the school's chances of receiving funding. Daniel did none of those things. He simply worked. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Assistant Principal Eric Lawson entered carrying another folder. "They've completed the preliminary access log," he said quietly. Principal Harper glanced toward Daniel before opening it. "The district wants everyone who entered the administrative corridor yesterday documented." Victoria listened without interrupting. "Routine procedure. Nothing unusual." Eric hesitated. "There is one issue." "What is it?" Harper asked. "The maintenance key registered one additional entry after office hours." Daniel looked up. "Mine." Eric nodded. "Yes. I came back because room 12 reported a leaking sink." Daniel spoke calmly. "The work order came through after dismissal." Eric checked the paperwork. It did. No contradiction existed. The records matched. Yet the atmosphere shifted ever so slightly. Someone standing near the copier whispered to another staff member. "So he really was there." The words were not cruel. They were simply uncertain. Sometimes uncertainty spread faster than accusation. Daniel heard them anyway. He could have defended himself. He could have reminded everyone that maintenance staff entered nearly every room in the building every week. He could have pointed out that dozens of employees also had access. Instead, he quietly removed a folded maintenance log from his pocket. I wrote down the repair time. He handed it to Eric. The sink started leaking at 5:23. The page contained careful handwriting. Parts replaced. Time completed. Materials used. Everything documented exactly as he always documented every repair. Eric accepted the log. This helps. Daniel only nodded. It should. Victoria noticed something then. The paper Daniel carried was old-fashioned. Not because it had aged, but because he still kept handwritten maintenance records alongside digital systems. Most organizations would consider that outdated. Yet every entry was neat enough to reconstruct an entire day's work. Interesting, she thought. Very interesting. As the inspection concluded, Principal Harper thanked the foundation team for their visit. Victoria prepared to leave but paused near the front entrance. She looked back once more toward the maintenance hallway. Daniel was kneeling beside a drinking fountain, tightening one loose fitting while a young teacher waited patiently with a box of classroom supplies balanced in her arms. Without saying a word, Daniel finished the repair, stood, held the door open for her, and wished her a pleasant evening. No audience. No recognition. Just another ordinary act. Victoria climbed into the waiting car, but instead of opening the financial reports prepared for the drive back downtown, she reopened the notebook resting on her lap. Beneath the words "pays attention," she added another line. "Keeps handwritten records." Then she closed the notebook. Across the parking lot, Daniel locked the school's side entrance as he had thousands of evenings before. He never noticed the elderly man sitting quietly inside a weathered pickup truck across the street. The stranger had watched nearly everything that happened since mid-afternoon. He had watched Daniel return the backpack. He had watched him hand over the maintenance log. He had watched him choose silence over self-defense. The old man remained behind the steering wheel for another minute before carefully reaching into the passenger seat and resting one weathered hand on a worn leather satchel that looked decades old. He did not get out. He did not call anyone. He simply looked toward Harrison Elementary one last time and drove away without a single word. By Tuesday morning, Harrison Elementary no longer sounded like itself. The familiar rhythm of children laughing between classes remained, but beneath it flowed a quieter current that only adults seemed to notice. Conversation stopped a little too quickly whenever Daniel Brooks entered the room. Smiles arrived a second too late. Ordinary greetings became polite rather than warm. Nothing obvious had changed, yet everything felt slightly different. Daniel sensed it before anyone spoke a single direct accusation. Years of working in schools had taught him that children often revealed their feelings with words, while adults usually revealed theirs with silence. He pushed his cleaning cart through the east hallway as he always did, stopping to straighten a crooked bulletin board that no one else had noticed. A construction paper star had begun peeling away from the display. He pressed it gently back into place. A pair of second graders hurried past. "Morning, Mr. Brooks." "Good morning, ladies." One of the girls smiled as usual. The other glanced toward two teachers talking near the office before lowering her voice. "My mom said they're looking into something." Daniel looked at her kindly. "I'm sure they'll figure everything out. You aren't in trouble, are you?" Children always ask the hardest questions with the simplest words. Daniel crouched until they stood eye to eye. Sometimes grown-ups have to answer questions too. "Are you scared?" He smiled softly. "I've learned that telling the truth is usually easier than remembering a lie." The girls nodded, satisfied with an answer that adults would probably have considered incomplete. After they disappeared down the hallway, Daniel remained kneeling for another moment, pretending to adjust a loose floor mat. Not because he needed to, because he wanted the children to leave believing everything was all right. The district's missing tablet had become the only subject teachers seemed unable to avoid. No one openly blamed Daniel. Not yet, but his name surfaced too often. He was working nearby. He had access. He keeps old keys. He knows every room. Each statement sounded harmless alone. Together they slowly formed a picture no one had intended to paint. Principal Harper refused to make assumptions. Eric Lawson insisted the investigation remain factual. Even so, uncertainty had a way of filling empty spaces before evidence ever arrived. Just before lunch, Daniel discovered Room 8's heating unit had stopped working. Outside, an early spring storm had pushed cold air across the county. The classroom temperature had already begun dropping. Mrs. Bennett looked worried. "The children can't stay in here all afternoon. I'll see what I can do." The replacement part normally required 2 days. Daniel knew that. He also knew the older maintenance system shared compatible components with an abandoned storage unit beneath the gymnasium. Most people would have submitted paperwork. Daniel picked up a flashlight. 20 minutes later, he emerged covered in dust, carrying a perfectly usable valve that had been sitting unused for years. By the time students returned from lunch, warm air once again drifted through the classroom vents. Mrs. Bennett looked relieved. "I don't know how you always figure these things out." Daniel shrugged. "The building tells you what it needs if you listen long enough." She laughed. "You always say things like that." "It's usually true." Neither of them noticed Victoria Aldrich standing quietly outside the classroom door, while reviewing facility notes with another member of her team. She heard every word. "The building tells you what it needs." Another sentence quietly joined the growing collection inside her memory. Late that afternoon, Daniel was asked to meet briefly with the district's facilities coordinator. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. Routine questions. Where had he worked Monday evening? Which keys had he used? Had anyone entered the hallway after him? Daniel answered every question exactly the same way he had answered them before. Without defensiveness. Without resentment. Without trying to guess what investigators wanted to hear. When the conversation ended, the coordinator thanked him for cooperating. As Daniel stepped back into the hallway, 2 delivery drivers waiting near the office glanced in his direction. One whispered quietly enough to think he could not be heard. "That's him." The other nodded. "Doesn't look like the type." "They never do." Daniel kept walking. Not faster. Not slower. Exactly the same pace. Martha Ellis found him replacing ceiling tiles near the cafeteria after dismissal. She carried 2 paper cups of coffee. "You skipped lunch." "I got busy." "You always get busy." She handed him 1 cup. "You don't have to pretend this isn't difficult." Daniel stared toward the empty cafeteria where hundreds of children had laughed only hours earlier. "I don't mind answering questions." "I know. I mind people becoming afraid of each other." Martha looked at him carefully. "They're afraid of being wrong." Daniel nodded. "So am I." She frowned. "No. I'm afraid someone else is carrying this weight while everyone keeps looking in the wrong direction." For several seconds neither of them spoke. Finally Martha asked the question she had been holding inside all day. "Are you angry?" Daniel thought about it honestly. "I'm disappointed." "At them?" "No." He looked around the school. "At how quickly fear changes good people." Martha felt tears gathering unexpectedly. That answer somehow hurt more than anger would have. That evening Daniel remained nearly an hour after everyone else had gone home. He moved through empty hallways checking windows before another storm arrived. Inside the library he noticed several books waiting to be reshelved. Although it was no longer his responsibility, he placed each one back where it belonged. He straightened chairs, closed forgotten blinds, watered 2 struggling classroom plants a teacher had accidentally left near the window. No one would know. No one would write it into a performance review. Tomorrow morning the building would simply feel cared for. As he locked the final classroom, he paused beside the old oak tree outside the east entrance. The wind carried the smell of rain. He rested one hand against the rough bark exactly as he had done thousands of mornings before. For the first time in many years he quietly whispered, "I hope they're looking in the right place." Then he walked toward his aging pickup truck. Across town, Victoria Aldrich sat alone inside her hotel suite reviewing inspection notes. Most pages contained budget figures and infrastructure assessments. Yet she found herself returning repeatedly to observations that had nothing to do with construction costs. Returns backpack personally. Keeps handwritten maintenance records. Repairs before being asked. Children trust him. Never speaks poorly of anyone. She closed the notebook. Something refused to fit. If Daniel Brooks had spent 20 years building quiet trust one small act at a time, why did the emerging story feel strangely incomplete? She disliked unanswered patterns. Patterns usually meant missing information. As she reached for another folder, something thin slipped unnoticed from between 2 pages and drifted silently onto the carpet beneath the desk. Victoria never saw it fall. Hours later, after she had gone to sleep, a hotel housekeeper vacuuming beneath the desk noticed the folded piece of paper. It was old, far older than anything else in the room. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in careful blue ink faded by decades, were just 6 simple words. "If this is ever found, please read." The housekeeper picked it up gently, turned it over once, and quietly placed it on the desk beside Victoria's notebook before leaving the room. Rain arrived before dawn, soft enough to sound like whispered conversations against the windows of Harrison Elementary. Daniel Brooks unlocked the side entrance at exactly 5:30, the old brass key turning with the familiar resistance he could have recognized even in complete darkness. The hallway greeted him with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights warming to life, the distant ticking of the boiler, and the faint scent of floor polish that had settled into the building over decades. Most people would have called it silence. Daniel knew better. Every building had its own language. He wheeled his cleaning cart through the empty corridor without hurry. The rubber wheels produced the same gentle rhythm they had for years. Squeak, roll, squeak, roll. Somewhere beyond the library walls, an old ventilation fan clicked every 17 seconds. He smiled almost unconsciously when he heard it. Still waiting on that bearing, he thought. He made a mental note to repair it before anyone filed another maintenance request. That was how his mind worked. Not in headlines, in small promises. The first light of morning filtered through tall classroom windows, turning suspended dust into floating ribbons of gold. Daniel paused outside the kindergarten wing. Someone had left dozens of paper butterflies hanging from the ceiling the afternoon before. Their tiny wings moved gently whenever the air conditioning cycled on. He stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary. Children would like seeing them move. He quietly adjusted one string that had become tangled. Only half an inch. Enough to let the butterfly spin freely again. Then he continued walking. There was comfort in repetition. Checking fire extinguishers. Straightening hallway rugs. Replacing soap dispensers. Wiping fingerprints from the glass doors before parents arrived. Each task carried almost no recognition by itself. Together they created something children rarely notice because they never had to. Safety. Daniel often believed the greatest success of his work was that no one thought about it at all. If a child could focus entirely on learning, someone behind the scenes had probably done his job well. At 7:15, the cafeteria lights flickered on. Martha Ellis was already pulling warm trays from the ovens. Without exchanging a word, she slid a fresh cinnamon roll onto a napkin and placed it beside Daniel's coffee. He looked at it. "You remembered. I always remember Tuesdays." He laughed quietly. "I forgot." "I know." She never asked whether he had slept well. He never asked whether she was worried. Some friendships became strong enough to leave important questions untouched. Daniel tore the cinnamon roll neatly in half. As always, he carried one piece outside. Near the old oak tree, 3 sparrows had already gathered beneath the lowest branch despite the rain. "They're spoiled," Martha once teased him. "No, they're faithful." This morning the birds landed closer than usual. Daniel scattered small crumbs across the damp ground before taking a single bite himself. Watching them eat somehow made breakfast taste better. Children gradually filled the building with familiar energy. Backpacks bounced. Sneakers squeaked. Teachers called cheerful greetings. Daniel greeted each child by name whenever he could. "Morning, Olivia. Good luck on your spelling test, Mason. Your cast's coming off this week, Emma." None of those conversations lasted longer than 10 seconds. Yet somehow every child walked away smiling a little wider. Adults often underestimated how powerful it felt to be remembered. The rumors had not disappeared. Daniel knew that. He occasionally noticed conversations pausing as he approached. He noticed eyes lingering a moment too long. He noticed people choosing careful words. Yet he refused to let suspicion become the loudest voice inside his own mind. Instead, he focused on ordinary things. helping a first grader tie untangled shoelaces, finding a missing hearing aid battery beneath a music room piano, replacing the wheel on a teacher's rolling chair before she returned from lunch. Quiet work remained his answer to noisy uncertainty. Near the end of the school day, Daniel entered the library carrying a replacement light fixture. The room stood empty except for Mrs. Collins, the librarian. She was carefully shelving biographies. Without looking up, she asked, "Would you mind checking that reading lamp?" Of course. Daniel repaired the loose connection within minutes. When he switched it back on, warm amber light spread across the small reading corner where dozens of children gathered every afternoon. Mrs. Collins smiled. "I've been meaning to submit that repair request." "You don't have to now." She hesitated. "You know, I never thanked you." "For what?" "The wheelchair ramp." Daniel looked puzzled. "You came in during Christmas break 3 years ago." "I remember. My father visited that January." Her voice softened. It was the first time he could actually reach the library by himself. Daniel simply nodded. "I'm glad. You never told anyone you built it yourself." "There wasn't much to tell." She watched him tighten the final screw. "There is if you're the one using it." Daniel smiled politely and packed away his tools. The conversation ended there. Not because either person lacked words. Because some gratitude became larger when left uncomplicated. Across town, Victoria Aldrich sat alone inside a conference room borrowed from the local district office. The folded sheet of yellowed paper now rested beside her notebook. She had found it waiting on her hotel desk that morning after the housekeeper placed it there. She still did not know how it had slipped from between her files. The paper felt strangely familiar despite having no obvious connection to the grant review. Its edges had been carefully preserved. Someone had unfolded and refolded it many times over the years. Not carelessly, lovingly. Victoria turned it over once again. She considered opening it. Instead, she placed it back inside her notebook. Not yet. Something told her this letter deserved more attention than a hurried glance between meetings. Late that evening, long after students had gone home, Daniel remained inside the auditorium replacing stage light bulbs before the upcoming spring concert. One by one, warm pools of light spread across the empty wooden stage. Rows of vacant seats stretched into darkness. He stood quietly in the center aisle. The silence felt peaceful, almost sacred. For a brief moment he imagined children filling every seat with nervous excitement, parents raising phones, teachers applauding. He rarely attended the performances themselves. By then his work was already finished. That had never bothered him. Seeing the lights come on was enough. Outside, rain had finally stopped. Clouds drifted apart, revealing a sky washed clean by the storm. Across the parking lot, Victoria happened to arrive unexpectedly for one final evening walkthrough before returning to headquarters. She entered through the rear auditorium doors without announcing herself. The stage lights were glowing. A single figure stood alone near the front row, checking each spotlight one last time. Daniel never noticed her. He simply adjusted one final beam until every corner of the stage received equal light. Then he stepped back, looked across the empty auditorium, and quietly switched every light off except one small fixture shining over center stage. Victoria remained in the shadows watching him. She had seen executives celebrate achievements. She had watched architects admire completed buildings. She had met donors eager to have their names displayed on plaques. But she had never seen someone take such quiet satisfaction in preparing a place where other people, not himself, would shine. She did not understand why that image stayed with her long after Daniel disappeared behind the backstage curtain. As she slowly walked toward the exit, her gaze drifted to the notebook beneath her arm. Inside it rested the old folded letter. For the first time since arriving at Harrison Elementary, a thought entered her mind that refused to leave. Perhaps everyone, including herself, had been asking the wrong questions about Mr. Brooks all along. Victoria Aldrich did not sleep well that night. It was not because of budgets, board meetings, or the foundation's grant recommendations. Those were familiar burdens, the kind she had carried for years. Instead, her thoughts kept returning to an ordinary man in a navy work jacket who seemed completely unaware of how often he placed other people ahead of himself. She had spent most of her career learning to recognize excellence. Yet something about Daniel Brooks refused to fit the categories she usually trusted. Before sunrise, she sat alone beside the hotel window with a cup of untouched coffee. The city was only beginning to wake. Streetlights still reflected off damp pavement left by the previous night's rain. The old folded paper rested on the table beside her notebook. This time she finally opened it. The paper crackled softly beneath her fingertips. The handwriting was elegant but unmistakably personal. Not a business letter. Not an official document. A letter written from one human being to another. The date at the top immediately caught her attention. 21 years earlier. She began reading. Every line slowed her breathing. The writer spoke about a terrible winter when Harrison Elementary had nearly closed after a burst water pipe flooded half the building. Insurance delays had threatened months without classrooms. Families feared hundreds of children would lose an entire semester. Then came one sentence. While everyone argued about who was responsible, one maintenance worker quietly worked through every night without asking for overtime, recognition, or even permission. He saved this school long before anyone realized it. Victoria stopped. Her eyes moved back across the sentence. Maintenance worker. Another paragraph followed. He refused to let us put his name in the newspaper. He said children deserve to remember their teachers, not the man who repaired the walls around them. Victoria lowered the letter. Outside the window, traffic continued moving through another ordinary morning. Inside the quiet hotel room, nothing felt ordinary anymore. She returned to Harrison Elementary before the official review team arrived. Without announcing why, she asked Principal Harper a simple question. Who served as head custodian here 21 years ago? Harper looked surprised. Daniel. The same Daniel Brooks? Yes. Victoria carefully folded the letter again. What happened during the flood? The principal smiled faintly. I wasn't principal then. She paused. But I remember hearing the stories. What stories? Harper looked toward the hallway where students were beginning to arrive. The district nearly evacuated the entire campus. And the heating system failed. Victoria waited. The repair companies couldn't reach us because roads were closed. She continued waiting. Daniel stayed inside almost 3 days with emergency crews. Victoria frowned gently. Alone. Mostly. He kept temporary heat running. He protected classroom materials. He even built makeshift drying racks so children's artwork wouldn't be destroyed. Harper laughed softly. The funny thing is, he never talks about it. Victoria requested access to archived maintenance records. Boxes covered in dust were brought from basement storage. Inside them rested faded inspection reports, handwritten repair logs, newspaper clippings, emergency purchase orders, and photographs no one had examined in years. Again and again one name appeared. Daniel Brooks. Emergency plumbing stabilization. Temporary electrical routing. Volunteer structural repairs. Weekend boiler restoration. Anonymous supply donations. The record stretched across 2 decades. Not one dramatic act. Hundreds of quiet ones. She slowly realized something remarkable. Every improvement she had admired during her visit. Every unusually careful repair. Every thoughtfully maintained classroom. Every safe hallway. They were not isolated examples. They were fingerprints. A lifetime of invisible fingerprints. Later that morning, Victoria visited the library archives. Mrs. Collins unlocked an old cabinet containing yearbooks dating back decades. Victoria turned page after page. Children changed. Teachers retired. Principals came and went. Yet one familiar face appeared quietly in the background year after year. Never standing in front. Always somewhere near the edge of the photograph. Holding a ladder. Adjusting stage curtains. Helping students decorate. Repairing scenery. Smiling without looking at the camera. Almost invisible. Until someone intentionally searched for him. Victoria closed the final yearbook. I don't think anyone has ever really seen him, she whispered. Mrs. Collins answered almost immediately. I think the children always did. During lunch, Victoria asked Martha Ellis if they could speak privately. Martha listened carefully as Victoria placed the old letter between them. You know about this? Martha smiled before even reading it. I know who wrote it. Victoria looked up. You do. It was Dr. Samuel Whitaker, the retired superintendent. He passed away 6 years ago. Victoria nodded. Why did Daniel keep this? Martha gently touched the worn paper. Because Dr. Whitaker gave it to him after Daniel refused the district's service award. Victoria blinked. He refused it? Martha laughed softly. 3 times. Why? He said schools already had enough ceremonies. Victoria could hardly believe it. He never wanted recognition. He wanted children to have functioning classrooms. Martha folded her hands. That was enough. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Reflective. The kind of silence that only arrived when assumptions quietly fell apart. That afternoon, Victoria watched Daniel from the second-floor balcony overlooking the main hallway. He was repairing a locker door while 2 fifth-grade students waited nearby. When he finished, one boy asked, "How do you know how to fix everything?" Daniel chuckled. "I don't. You always do." "No." He gently handed the boy the repaired handle. "I just stay with the problem a little longer than most people." Victoria felt something inside her shift. Not dramatically, quietly, like a door opening 1 inch after years of remaining closed. She finally understood why every observation in her notebook had felt connected. The backpack, the handwritten records, the repaired heating system, the birds beneath the oak tree, the stage lights, the anonymous kindness, the old letter. None of those moments proved Daniel Brooks was extraordinary by themselves. Together, they revealed something much greater. His character had never depended on whether anyone was watching. It remained exactly the same in every circumstance. That was the evidence she had been searching for all along. Not evidence about the missing tablet. Evidence about the man. Late that afternoon, a district investigator quietly informed Victoria that the tablet investigation had expanded. Additional digital access records were being reviewed. The findings would likely take another day. Victoria listened politely. For the first time, however, the investigation no longer felt like the center of the story. Something far more important demanded her attention. She carefully placed Dr. Whitaker's old letter back inside its envelope. Then she looked toward Principal Harper. "I would like every employee, every teacher, every member of the school board, and every foundation representative to remain here tomorrow afternoon." Harper looked puzzled. "For another inspection?" Victoria slowly shook her head. "No." She glanced once more through the hallway window where Daniel quietly helped a first grader zip a stubborn winter coat before returning to his cleaning cart. "This time," Victoria said softly, "we're going to make sure everyone finally sees the person who has been standing in front of them all these years." The auditorium filled more quietly than anyone expected. Teachers entered first, speaking in low voices. Office staff took seats near the back. Members of the district board arrived carrying folders they never opened. Representatives from the Aldridge Education Foundation sat together in the center section, unsure why an additional gathering had been added to an already demanding schedule. Even the maintenance staff had been invited. Daniel almost declined. He assumed the meeting concerned the grant evaluation and believed there were still hallway floors that needed polishing before the spring concert. Only after Principal Harper personally asked him to attend did he agree. He chose his usual seat near the last row, far enough away that others could see the stage without looking past him. It was where he always sat whenever the school gathered. Victoria Aldridge stood alone beneath the same stage lights Daniel had adjusted only the evening before. She waited until the room became completely still. No presentation appeared on the screen behind her. No financial charts. No architectural drawings. Only a single wooden podium, and an old folded letter resting beside it. She looked across the audience before speaking. "I came to Harrison Elementary expecting to evaluate a building." Her voice remained calm. "I believed I was here to determine whether this school deserved a significant investment." She paused. "I have reached my decision." Several board members exchanged hopeful glances. "But not for the reasons I expected." Victoria lifted the faded letter carefully. "This paper is more than 20 years old." She smiled gently. Someone almost threw it away. Daniel immediately recognized the envelope. His breathing slowed. He had not seen it in years. Victoria continued. When I first arrived, I measured classrooms. I reviewed maintenance records. I questioned procedures. I looked for evidence. She lowered her eyes briefly. What I failed to notice was the person quietly creating that evidence every single day. Silence settled across the auditorium. Not uncomfortable. Expectant. Victoria unfolded the letter. Its familiar creases reflected softly beneath the stage lights. I would like to read just a small portion. Her voice became slower. While everyone argued about responsibility, one maintenance worker quietly repaired what others believed could not be saved. He asked for neither recognition nor reward. He simply believed children deserved to return to school. No one moved. If schools are remembered for the people who care for them, then Harrison Elementary has been fortunate beyond measure. Victoria folded the page once more. The author was Dr. Samuel Whitaker. Several older teachers immediately recognized the name. The maintenance worker he described is sitting in this room. Dozens of heads turned together. Toward the final row. Toward Daniel. He instinctively looked down rather than around. Victoria stepped away from the podium. Not toward the district officials. Not toward the board. Toward Daniel. Every footstep echoed gently through the auditorium. When she reached the final row, she stopped. Then, before anyone could guess what she intended to do, she extended both hands. Not to present an award. Simply to greet him properly. Mr. Brooks. Daniel stood slowly. Her handshake was firm. Respectful. I owe you an apology. Daniel answered quietly. There is no need. There is. Victoria smiled sadly. I evaluated this school. She looked around the room. But I nearly overlooked the person who has protected it longest. She turned back toward him. I believed reports before I understood character. Daniel shook his head gently. You were doing your job. I was. She nodded. But I should have looked more carefully. Victoria faced the audience once again. I've spent years telling school leaders that culture cannot be purchased. She looked toward Daniel. This week someone reminded me that culture is built one quiet act at a time. She invited him to walk beside her toward the stage. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct urged him to remain where he was. Martha smiled from across the aisle. Principal Harper gave a small encouraging nod. Finally, Daniel walked forward. Not proudly, simply politely. Victoria did something no one expected. Instead of standing behind the podium herself, she stepped aside. She placed the microphone lower, adjusted it for Daniel's height, then quietly moved behind him, giving him the place of honor. The gesture spoke louder than any prepared speech. For perhaps the first time in many years, the invisible man stood where everyone could see him. Daniel looked at the microphone for several seconds, then smiled almost shyly. I don't think I've ever used one of these. Gentle laughter spread across the room. The tension dissolved. I honestly don't know what to say. He rested one hand lightly against the podium. I only cleaned the floors. Several teachers smiled through damp eyes. Mrs. Collins whispered, You did much more. Daniel continued, I've always believed children notice more than adults think. They remember whether a classroom feels safe. They remember whether someone knows their name. They remember kindness. He paused. I figured, if I helped the building take care of them, his voice softened, then maybe the building would help take care of them too. No elaborate speech followed. No dramatic declaration. Only quiet truth. Exactly as he had lived it. Victoria then reached into a small presentation folder. Inside rested the Foundation's official recommendation. She signed it before everyone, not from behind a conference table. Standing beside Daniel, I am approving Harrison Elementary's full revitalization grant. Applause erupted across the auditorium. But one condition accompanies that approval. The room became quiet again. Victoria smiled. The restoration plans will preserve the old oak tree beside the east entrance. Daniel looked up surprised. And the new student welcome garden will be built around it. She glanced toward him. Some traditions deserve protecting. Daniel's eyes drifted toward the auditorium windows. The oak tree. Every morning. Every season. Every quiet beginning. Someone had finally noticed. When the meeting ended, no crowd rushed toward the exits. Instead, people formed a gentle line. Not to congratulate the CEO, to thank Daniel. Teachers remembered forgotten repairs. Parents remembered small kindnesses. Former students who now worked at the school remembered conversations from years earlier. One after another. No grand speeches. Only simple memories. You fixed my violin stand. You stayed after the snowstorm. You found my son's hearing aid. You remembered my daughter's birthday. Each story became another piece of a picture everyone suddenly realized had been there all along. Daniel accepted every word with the same humble smile, never correcting anyone, never reminding them of more things he had done. Simply listening. Simply grateful. As evening settled over Harrison Elementary, the auditorium gradually emptied. The stage lights dimmed until only one remained. The single center spotlight Daniel had carefully aligned the night before still shone softly across the wooden floor. Beyond the open doors, the old oak tree stood quietly beneath the golden light of sunset. Its branches moved gently in the evening breeze. For the first time in many years, Daniel did not walk past it alone. Several children, teachers, and parents followed him outside without anyone asking them to. Together they stood beneath the old tree in comfortable silence, while above them, 3 familiar sparrows settled onto the same weathered branch where they had greeted him every morning for years. Spring arrived at Harrison Elementary almost without anyone noticing. The last patches of snow disappeared from the edges of the playground. Tulips pushed through the softened earth beside the front walkway. The old oak tree stretched new leaves toward the morning sky, its branches carrying the same quiet patience that had greeted Daniel Brooks for so many years. Some things had changed. Many things had not. Daniel's alarm still rang before dawn. He still sat for a moment on the edge of his bed before beginning the day. His old coffee thermos still accompanied him every morning. His work boots remained polished every Sunday evening. The sparrows still waited beneath the oak tree, hopping impatiently across the grass until the familiar crumbs appeared. Recognition had never altered the rhythm of his life. It had only changed the number of people who finally understood it. When Daniel unlocked the side entrance that Monday morning, he paused as he always had, resting one weathered hand against the rough bark of the old oak. This time, however, he noticed something new. Just beyond the tree, workers had finished installing the entrance to the foundation's new welcome garden. The flowers were still young, their colors only beginning to emerge, but one simple bronze plaque had already been secured to a low stone near the path. Daniel walked closer, expecting to see the foundation's name. Instead, he found a short sentence engraved beneath a small outline of the oak tree. Every child deserves a place cared for with quiet hands. No person's name appeared beneath the words. No portrait. No title. Only the sentence. Daniel smiled to himself. Somehow Victoria had understood exactly what mattered most. The garden was not about honoring one man. It was about reminding every child that kindness often worked quietly. As students began arriving, something else felt different. Not dramatic. Gentle. Children still raced toward classrooms. Parents still hurried to work. Teachers still balanced coffee cups and lesson plans. Yet far more people paused to greet Daniel than before. "Morning, Mr. Brooks. Thanks for fixing our classroom window. Good luck with the spring concert." Their words carried no awkwardness now. Only genuine appreciation. Daniel answered every greeting exactly as he always had, never lingering long enough to make himself the center of attention. Some habits, he believed, should never change. Inside the library, Mrs. Collins had created a new display near the reading corner. It featured books about kindness, perseverance, community, and quiet leadership. Resting carefully inside a protective glass frame beside the display was a copy of Dr. Samuel Whitaker's old letter. The original remained safely preserved, but every child who wandered into the library could now read the words that had nearly disappeared forever. At the bottom of the display, another small card carried a single question. Who quietly makes your day better? Students began leaving handwritten notes beneath it. They thanked bus drivers, cafeteria workers, crossing guards, teaching assistants, grandparents, custodians, secretaries, coaches, parents. By the end of the week, The basket beneath the display overflowed with gratitude that might otherwise have remained unspoken. Victoria returned one final time before construction on the new campus improvements officially began. She found Daniel replacing a loose hinge on the greenhouse door behind the science classrooms. "I thought you might be taking a day off after everything," she said with a smile. Daniel chuckled softly without looking up. "The door didn't know there was a ceremony." Victoria laughed. "No, I suppose it didn't." For a moment they stood together watching students plant vegetables in small raised garden beds. "You've changed this school," Victoria said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "The school changed me first." She understood what he meant. Buildings were made of brick, wood, glass, and steel. Schools were built by people who chose to care long after anyone stopped watching. Before leaving, Victoria reached into her briefcase and handed Daniel a simple envelope. "I thought you should have this." Inside was the original letter from Dr. Samuel Whitaker, now carefully restored and protected inside an archival sleeve. Daniel looked at the familiar handwriting for a long time before folding the envelope closed once more. "Thank you," he said. "It belongs with you," Victoria replied. "It always did." That afternoon, after the final school bell echoed through the hallways, Daniel completed his usual walk around the building. He checked every classroom door, straightened one crooked picture frame, picked up a stray pencil from the floor outside room 12, switched off the auditorium lights one by one until only the center spotlight remained for a few quiet seconds, just as he always liked to do. Then he turned that light off as well. As he stepped outside, warm sunlight filtered through the branches of the old oak tree, scattering gentle shadows across the walkway. The 3 sparrows fluttered down to greet him once again. Daniel smiled, broke a small piece from the sandwich he had saved for later, and scattered a few crumbs beneath the tree. Around him, the welcome garden stirred softly in the afternoon breeze. Children's laughter drifted across the playground. Somewhere inside the building, a teacher closed a classroom door. Another ordinary day had come to an end, yet it no longer felt as though kindness had gone unnoticed. Sometimes the people who change our lives never stand at the front of the room. They simply open the door before we arrive, repair what is broken before we see it, remember our names when the world feels busy, and quietly leave every place a little better than they found it. If this story reminded you of someone whose quiet goodness helped shape your life, I hope you will carry their memory with you today, and perhaps even tell them while you still can. Some letters wait years to be read. Gratitude should not.